Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Glenn, for that wonderful introduction and start off to the day. Welcome, everybody. Gail and I are pleased to be able to talk with you a little bit this morning about stewardship, sustainability, and mission, and how those things impact the work that you do in your congregations, your mid-councils, and all of the wonderful activities that you're engaged with. Our goal is to talk about some of the key topics around stewardship, give you some examples, and also provide you some resources. As Maggie said, our slides and our presentation will be made available to you in a couple of days, so you can see those at your leisure. I am going to try to share my screen now and pull up that presentation, so give me a second here, and hopefully technology will cooperate and I will be able to do that. I can see it. I'm going to assume that everybody else can. Hopefully, Maggie, if you can see it, nod. Glenn is nodding, so it looks like it's working. Step one taken care of. Thank you very much. As I said, we'd like to talk to you a little bit about, stewardship and some of the key topics. And when we talk about stewardship, we obviously are talking about money and how that relates to our Christian stewardship and our faith journey. And this comic was shared with me years ago, and I still think it's relevant. And one of the funnier things that kind of comes to mind when we think about God and money. And as you can see, they baptizing the gentleman. He tells Charles he's going to baptize him, and everything that goes under the water belongs to God. And of course, Charles raises his wallet above the level of the water, which is kind of what we experience a lot of, where we have a disconnect between our stewardship and our money. And how do we overcome that? How do we talk about that? What are the things that are going through people's minds when they relate to stewardship and money and the church and how we are givers and good disciples of all that we've been given. And of course, we want to base this in stewardship. We want to talk about this in regards to the Bible, obviously, and our theology. And we like to use 2 Corinthians 9, 6-8 to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're talking about and what it means to be good stewards of everything that God has given. And I won't read it, but you can read that. And the couple of things that I want to point out on this one is that we are encouraging generosity. The first line in there is extremely important. And what we've done at the foundation is to talk about creating cultures of generosity within your faith communities, within your congregations, and what that means, and how that goes beyond just the act of giving, and how we come from a generous heart, which it talks here in the second line, which says giving grows out of the heart. We will talk a little bit about that more in depth. When I started with the foundation 16 years ago, one of my colleagues told me an interesting fact that I still share today and remember. And he said that if we talk in our churches, particularly on Sunday morning, about finances, money, as often as Christ did in his preachings in the gospel, we would hear 17 sermons a year on finances or money. And if you think about that, that's a lot. And that really emphasizes the point of, how valuable it is to connect our spirituality to our finances and our money. As that comic showed us, there is a disconnect there, and we do need to bring those pieces together. And that's really what we want to do today, is to talk about how we can do that. What are some of the things that we can talk with our members about, our donors, so to speak, about that connect our spirituality and our finances. As Maggie alluded to, I am Stephen Keizer. I am the Vice President for Ministry Relations with the Presbyterian Foundation. I have been doing this work for 16 years. Prior to that, I was a development officer at my alma mater, Western Michigan University, which is still why I reside in Portage, Michigan. Prior to that, I was raised in the church. I am a PK. For most of you, that's a familiar term. For those of you that don't know, that means I'm a preacher's kid. My father was a Presbyterian pastor, had the blessing to serve the PCUSA for 60 years as a minister in several different churches in West Michigan. My grandfather was also a Presbyterian pastor in the denomination and served in West Michigan as well. I am pleased to introduce the Reverend Gail Monsma, who will help and assist with the presentation today and share some stories that she has learned. Gail, are you able to share a little bit more about yourself with the folks? I know she texted me and said she was having a little difficulty with the technology this morning. Gail, are you there? Maggie, is there a way to get Nathan to try to reach out to Gail and see if we can't get Gail?
Yeah, we'll work on that, seeing if we can't get Gail on here. Sorry, everyone.
Thank you for that, Maggie. While we're doing that, Gail,
are you
there?
Yeah, I just got unmuted. I don't know if people can see me or not.
We can, Gail. We can see you in the box. Thank you and welcome this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, so I'll just talk without seeing myself. But what I wanted to say too is that I come from a background of also professional development on some years that I worked outside of ministry, worked for United Way and raised funds for a Christian retirement home and attended the IUPUI School of Stewardship, which is now the Lilly Stewardship. Before we get going too, I want to say that you have a tremendous gift here, is that keep these slides, takes notes, even the cartoon, if you preach with PowerPoint. This is an unbelievable gift for sermon material for you and for sharing with your congregation.
Great. Thank you. And again, welcome, Gail. We're blessed to have you as well. Gail and I have been fortunate colleagues over the years. She has served several churches in Michigan. I cover Michigan and Ohio as well as being the Vice President for Ministry Relations. And we have had the pleasure of working together and doing lots of things in the churches that she has worked in, and also have a bigger connection that Gail knows my mom and dad through her work at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and have really been blessed that Gail has gotten to know my parents, and then I've gotten to know Gail through that connection as well. So thank you, Gail, again for being with us. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the foundation, since we are the organization that is bringing this information to you, and the organization that I work for. Most of you are probably familiar with us and what we do, but as Gail said, we are a resource to you. Our mission is your mission. We don't do mission. We're here to help you do your mission. And we are a vital part of the denomination, and we cultivate, attract, and manage financial resources from individuals and institutions to serve Christ's mission. Again, hopefully what you understand is we're here for you. We're here to help you and to make sure that you are vital and sustainable and able to continue to do God's work well into the future. Gail, I know you're going to add.
And I'm just going to say here is I ran into the foundation because Stephen's office was in Lake Michigan Presbytery. And I was at a church that needed quite a bit of stewardship work in Michigan. And I talked to Steve, found out what they offered, and took full advantage of it. The other thing is that the Presbyterian Foundation is an objective third party that can come in and help you take advantage of the representatives in your region. The other thing for investment, they do investment that is ethical. You have a lot of choices in it. And I can honestly say from my, 30 some years in ministry, I've seen a lot of arguments over investments. The foundation can help you with that. Take it out of take it out of the hands of the congregation and stop any conflict of interests that might be there also. I think the foundation is probably the best kept secret in the Presbyterian Church at this time. And hopefully today um, you'll be, you'll notice a lot of the gifts and what can be offered, what you can take advantage of. Thanks, Steve.
No, thank you, Gail. And we'll share some of those resources at the end
Yep.
as well that you can take advantage of through the foundation and some of the things that we have to offer. But let's get into the meat of this morning's conversation. That's to talk a little bit about stewardship. We're going to spend a little time talking about what stewardship is, and we're also going to take a little time talking about what stewardship is not, because I think it's important to know both sides of that coin. And first, I want to again just kind of ground this in Scripture and reflect on Matthew 6:21 that says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Again, it is extremely important to understand that connection and how that relates to what we're talking about and what you're talking about when it comes to stewardship. I always like to say, I think this goes the same way or both ways. I not only where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, but I also think you can do the converse. Where your heart will be, your treasure will there be as also. So it really connects that, what you care about, what you're passionate about, what's in your heart. You're also going to support that with your finances and your dollars. And I think it's important to understand that. And I think it's important for the church to understand that when we're talking about stewardship with our members and what that means, and really understanding, what drives people and what moves them and why they're there. Why are they a part of your faith community? And really using that to make that connection strong and to help them maximize that and to really feel good about their faith journey and what their heart is driving them to do. Stewardship is also a way for the church to theologically be the antidote to the chief idols of our age. I think we're all familiar with consumerism and materialism and the need to acquire things materially here while we're on this world, on this planet. And this is our opportunity to kind of give a counter to that, to talk more about the theological basis, what Christ wants us to do, how we can be good stewards of what God has given us instead of just acquiring things, using it as a tool to buy and do the things that we want to do as humans. I think that's a good opportunity for stewardship to lay that theological basis for that. And then it's also about the joyous disciples, or the discipline, of thanking God with the way we live our lives and spending and sharing our money. We'll spend a few moments today talking about gratitude and basing our stewardship in gratitude. And we at the foundation think that is extremely important. And Gail, I know you've had a lot of experience with this. I also know that you've really keyed in on the discipline of stewardship and what that means and the pastor's role in that.
I put stewardship now right up there as a pivotal faith practice. And what we give and how we give back joyously should involve our whole life. So I always share that my tithing or my giving is at such a point that it involves everything I do. It involves where I take vacations. It involves what I buy, how much I can afford. Is it all good stewardship? But also there's a sacrifice in the amount I'm giving. And I think as a church, we've gotten away from that. It's not just about money. It's of course time and talents and how we share. But it is about money too. And so as a pastor, I'm always open about how much I give. whether it's a percentage of how much I give. And sometimes I'm very open in sharing what I give. And I find out myself, you know, many pastors will find that they're some of the top givers in their congregation. But it's also something that I'm thankful for, that it sets me and keeps me focused on my faith.
Yeah, and I like what you said in there too, Gail. It's about making choices, right? And talking about that is important in the process. But we like to talk about stewardship from a place of gratitude. That's top on the list for us. The spiritual growth we've mentioned, the time, talent, and treasure we'll talk about as well a little later on. But that's extremely important in this process. And then again, it's about disciple making. It's about encouraging folks to continue on their own spiritual journey, and how their finances reflect that, and how they use what God has given them to reflect their discipleship and their faith journey as well. So those are the key points that we think stewardship is, and where it needs to go, and what the foundation is for that. And again, gratitude is at the center of that. It starts with gratitude. Stewardship is our thanking God for all that He's blessed us, but we also have to be willing to thank those who have chosen to do that. And we need to remember that they need to be thanked as well. And our stewardship programs need to come from that. And we need to incorporate that into the process. And then it also comes from, an abundance versus scarcity mentality. Too many times we get to a place where, we are in great need. We feel like we don't have enough to do what we want. And we are, basing our stewardship message in that realm. And what we found at the foundation when we talk to successful churches is that if we can spin that narrative to talk about all the blessings and the great abundance that God has given us first, and to talk about giving from abundance instead of coming from a place of scarcity, that seems to be what helps churches become successful in meeting their goals. And I know Gail has done this at some of the churches she's done, and it's been a little difficult. She'll tell you to try to make that narrative. And one of the examples I love to give is a church that Gail worked at, where I say this, Gail would probably say this a little differently, but we talk about the church doing 12 things and doing them not very good, and having to come down and do 5 things and do them really well before they can start growing back and doing the other 7 things. And sometimes that can be a difficult thing to do, but it's extremely important, I think, to really evaluate what are we doing, what's important, and how can we do a core group of things better and become really good at that, and then have the abundance to go from there and build up, instead of being spread so thin with our time and our talents and our treasures. And then at the heart of that, really becoming missional. And how do those 5 things really impact the mission?
Can I say something too about the abundance versus scarcity? I want to emphasize here that this is not the Joel Osteen prosperity gospel. This is saying that God wants, from the prophetic voice of the Old Testament to the New Testament, that God wants blessings and there's enough for all. And so often in this abundance versus scarcity, I go back to scripture and talk about our sacred imagination that is biblical. Can you imagine a church without any financial problems? And this fall, I tied it into Isaiah 40, where, the prophet talks about every valley shall be lifted, every mountain shall be made low, even the ground shall be level. That's the kind of abundance and biblical base. Not that if your congregation gives and tithes, you'll be healthy, wealthy, and blessed. So I just want to say, with so much going on with prosperity gospel right now, that's a big difference.
And when we talk about gratitude, some of the steps of that are easy to do, and they really revolve around saying thank you. And I think that's something that we need to do a better job of in a lot of situations is saying thank you, and not only for gifts that come in, but for things that people do. And again, getting back to that three-legged stool that we'll talk about in a minute, it's okay to thank people for their talents. When someone is blessed with the gift of singing, and they do a wonderful solo on a Sunday morning that adds so much richness to our worship services, that's a wonderful opportunity to thank someone for their gifts that God has bestowed upon them, and doing that in lots of ways, whether it's emails, whether it's thank you notes. We refer to a wonderful book called Not Your Parents' Offering Plate by Cliff Christopher, and it's on our bibliography and references on our slides at the end. But Cliff challenges folks to just do 10 thank you notes a week, to make a difference, to just incorporate the act of saying thank you in your day-to-day routine. And I've talked to a lot of pastors that have seen some wonderful results from just doing that small thing. And Gail, I know you've done that in a variety of ways.
I have, and I have a confession to make here. I hate writing written thank you notes, and I've worked on that because I'm a perfectionist and I can't spell. So I end up tearing up so many notes. I still do it, but I have found even the email, send something out, thank people, just thanks you rocked at that, or thank you for doing that. And then I think one of the things with recognition and saying thank you is when there's a program at church that an elder or other people have worked on, make sure they're the spokesperson for that program. Make sure that you're holding up the people within the congregation for what they're doing well, and give them the credit for that and say thank you. People will say, do you want to make this announcement, Gail? Do you want to make this? And I know it's different with COVID, but I'll say, no, you should be making that announcement. That's your program area. So that's just a little something there.
Yeah, and I think that's extremely important, Gail. A lot of times we rely on the pastors to do a lot of this. But I think, as you see from this slide, that, we encourage everybody to be involved in that process, whether it's, session members, whether it's the generosity team, or as Gail said, the champion of a program, or someone who's leading an effort. It's important to do that. And it's just great to include that in your day-to-day activities. And it really goes a long way in helping change the culture to a culture of generosity and gratitude, which we know provides a foundation for success and increased results in what you're trying to accomplish through your stewardship program. There are other things as well, annual celebrations, phone calls are just a different way of saying thank you. Legacy societies are something that our secular partners like universities do wonderfully, but can be incorporated into the church life. There are just a wonderful plethora of opportunities to say thank you, and we just encourage you to utilize those in a variety of ways. And again, whatever fits your culture too, is important to think about as you think about, how do I say thank you, and how do I make that fit of the way we do work in our congregations. We've mentioned this several times, time, talent, and treasure, but we, say it because it's important, and stewardship really is that three-legged stool, and we all know what happens if one of those legs is missing, or if one of those legs is shorter, or they're not even, the stool is not as strong and it wobbles. And it's not an either or, it's an and. It's time, talent, and treasure. And if you haven't figured out a way to capture data on, all three of those areas, like where are people spending their time at the church? What are they involved in? What are their talents, as well as their giving history? We encourage you to do that. And there are, databases out there that allow you to capture that information. But it's really important to know that. Again, if you get back to where your treasure or where your heart is, there your treasure will be too. Or again, I said it the way I like it. It's the other way in Matthew. It's where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. But this is extremely important in that if we know what our folks are spending their time at, if we know what their talents are, it's most likely that's where they'll want their treasure to be. And our stewardship programs can be more effective, can be more rich, and rich by, I mean, important to people, not necessarily rich in dollar value, but it could be as well. It's more rich and more meaningful to them if we tailor that, ask and that stewardship time to what's important to them, and keeping track of where they spend their time, what their talents are, helps us understand, who they are as people, what they bring to our community, and what, they find valuable to do that.
I want to pop in something else
Sure.
there. Don't put people as, if it's at all possible, in a box of where they might fit. Sometimes someone who would be great at stewardship, we tend to say, well, someone has to have a financial background or this background or that. But there's also spiritual gifts, and people sometimes enjoy not doing what they do vocationally outside of the church and using gifts and talents in someplace else. So always be looking for how can the church allow someone to live into their gifts that God has given them.
Amen. Exactly. Appreciate those words, Gail. I think they're extremely important. The next slide talks about what stewardship is not, and I think you can garner from the things we've already said, that stewardship is really not about money as much as it is about a spiritual journey. It's about linking that time, talent, and treasure. It's about our gratitude back to God for all that He has blessed us with. It's not fundraising. We like to talk about Cliff Christopher's book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. I've already mentioned that. I'll mention it again. But, Cliff comes from a place of fundraising and talking about how the secular techniques for fundraising can be used in a Christian setting. I think he does a wonderful job of it. But I think we need to understand that, we are a little different from our secular partners in higher ed and the rest of them, based on the fact that we are trying to, come at this from a different level. There is a different level of connection between our money and our spirituality and our journey. It is missional. It is time, talent, and treasure. And I think that's different. But I think some of the techniques that we use or that they use can be helpful in doing that. And I think it's important to know the differences and understand that. It's also not about meeting the budget, and it's not about us. It's really about the donor. And we're going to talk a little bit about the donor and being donor-centered and what their motivations are. But stewardship is not that. And then finally, it's not once a year. As you can, venture by the language we're using, creating a culture of generosity. We encourage to talk about this, more than just in October, November, when you do your stewardship campaign. Again, that's why I use that example of, if we talk about finances as often as Christ did in the Gospels, we'd have 17 sermons on it. You can't do that in that short window of time. We need to do that year round. Gail?
And this is probably going to be the where the pastor comes in, is talking about stewardship as discipleship, but sharing what the church is, keeping the vision and values and what the church is. And stewardship isn't about fundraising. Again, the budget, sure, it's tied into the budget, but that's a shift that some of the resources and books that will be listed at the end of this, even this PowerPoint, will be a tool for you to share with your church. That it's about a spiritual practice, discipline. It's about the person giving. And it's about giving back to God for God's reign to become evident.
Yeah, Gail talks about, using this PowerPoint for sermon material and using it with your session, which I think is extremely important. But one of the places where it can be very valuable is this slide. And I know a few of my colleagues at the foundation across the country have done this in some of their churches. But it's really to talk to people about their own theology of stewardship and asking some general questions to get them thinking about, the influences on their stewardship and what has, shaped their views of stewardship. And these three questions are wonderful when we, have enough time, and when we're in a little different format. Sometimes we, break out in little groups and we take the time to answer these questions and share them. But I wanted to give those to you as a tool to kind of enhance your stewardship program by starting with some of these questions and asking your members, what's their first memory of stewardship? Who taught them about stewardship? And why is giving to the church important to them? And you'll be really surprised and interested by the stories and the things that they will share. A lot of times we get, those banks. When I grew up in the church and I was in Sunday school, we always had the 1 great hour of sharing banks, and they were either a church or a fish or, some shape. And we were encouraged as youth to put money in that. And then we would bring it to the front on a certain Sunday, and that money would be collected and go to 1 great hour of sharing. It's those kinds of stories and the people that have impacted us that make a difference and can kind of help us get an understanding of what the culture of stewardship is in our congregation if we don't know. But a wonderful exercise to go through if you haven't done something like that.
I want to share that story of at a church I worked with, and a young man, Chris, was a 10th grader, and he came up to me, and the mission trip was going to be the actual cost of the mission trip was $325. And Chris came up to me and said, I talked to my parents and they said that I could give my tithe for a scholarship, because I know some of the kids from church can't afford the whole mission trip. And so he gave me $325 in cash. And I was like, a 10th grader. I was like, so how did you get this money and what do you do for it? And he had a really profitable newspaper route, a bunch of apartments in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he made $3,200 a year. And so he took 10% of that money and gave it to the church, and what a story. I still get choked up talking about it. And then his parents said, and you put 10% in savings, but it's telling those stories, sharing those stories, hearing them from your session and other people, and incorporating them into sermons, or even have them sharing it with your church at a moment for mission or as part of the sermon.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story too, Gail, because it really talks about a lot of things. And the thing I take away from it is, the fact that this is, a 10th grader. And, sometimes we tend to think about, stewardship being for, a different group of folks in our church and, older folks and families and all that stuff. But it's really important, to do that education early on, and to see a 10th grader understand that and want to be a part of that, and focus on other people rather than himself, and realizing that some kids can't afford it, and to structure it that way, I think is just an extremely powerful story to be shared. And you mentioned tithing in there, which I think is good. Obviously can't have a stewardship conversation without some mention of tithing. And again, we're not here to give you one version or the other, or get into a deep discussion about it, because there are a lot of layers of it. But we do want to include it as part of the conversation. And Proverbs 3:9 talks about honoring the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. And to me, that's the important part of the tithing, is that first part, right? Giving back to God first. Whether that's 10%, as you mentioned in your example, whether that's 10% of your gross income, your net income, whatever. I know we can, banter that around, for many, many hours. But the first fruits part of that concept, I think, Gail, you would agree, is extremely important.
Well,
And understanding that, we should give back to God first, because he gave to us, and that gratitude again.
and you're coming into, theologically, you're coming into a wonderful season. Holy Week is Passover. During Passover is the feast of the first fruits, and then actually Pentecost in the Jewish tradition is also the celebration of the first fruits. So it's a wonderful time to talk about as Jesus goes into Jerusalem. This Sunday is the cleaning out the temple, and all of those people were coming into Jerusalem to practice giving back and then to prepare to give the first fruits of the harvest.
Right. We talked a little bit earlier about, donor motivation, and said we'd touch on it. I do want to touch on it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But it is important, if we are going to incorporate some of the secular strategies into our stewardship process, we do need to understand, donor decision, and what motivates folks. And there are a lot of things that motivate them, but these are the three top things that motivate an individual to give. And I like to show these because the first one, making an impact, is extremely important. During stewardship, it's an extremely important time to connect the dots between, what our mission is and the impact that mission is having with the folks that are benefiting from that. I have a little bit of CRC, RCA background in my family, and I've got some missionaries that come back every year, every summer, and do a tour to the churches that support them and give them an impact update, how they're doing, the people they're talking to, the stories that they're doing. And I always thought that was a wonderful exercise in connecting the donors to the people who are receiving the money or the benefit from those activities. And then financial stability, I think that's key. Donors want to give to something that's financially stable. I think that gets back to the abundance scarcity message. We want to let folks know that, we can do this. We are financially stable. We're going to be around for a long time to make an impact. And then they want to believe in the leadership. So we have to, as pastors, let them know that we can provide that leadership to accomplish what we're, supporting in the mission activities that our dollars are going to.
And part of that leadership and financial stability too, I think, is transparency. So if you use a narrative budget, yay, very good, but also have the ability, if people want to see a more detailed budget, you're going to have that in your church, where things are spent, what they go to, salaries. Be transparent. Don't get creative in your financing. If you have to take something out of another budget to pay for another, be open about it. The worst thing you can do is try to hide challenges financially in too much creative accounting. And believe me, people in a church appreciate it. They appreciate it, and they want honest leadership.
Yeah, I agree with that, Gail. I think you're spot on, and I think it really gets to the heart of, our stories, right? And what are our stories going to be? And when we, talk about our financial situation, we need to be honest about that, but we also need to tell, the right stories about it, and what that's saying, and help people understand that. We talked earlier about, talking to folks about their early recollections with stewardship. I think it's also important to talk about people about their stories. Why are they at the church? What do we do well? What's your role in the church? Why do you come here? Why do you support it? How are we being the hands and feet of Christ? How are we celebrating those activities? Telling our story is really important in communicating that impact, that financial stability, that transparency, as Gail talks about, and how we've accomplished this as the leaders in our faith community. And then using those stories to invite people to engage in the church, right? Those stories should really be that, teaser, that gateway, that inspiration that gets people excited about being engaged in the activities in your church, creating that energy about those activities. And then how do we do that? There's lots of ways to do that. We talked about preaching, obviously, already. Minute for Missions are wonderful. Gail alluded to that. Bringing people up who are champions for an activity to talk about it during Sunday. Newsletters are great. Brochures, Sunday school testimony. I mean, there are just so many ways. Videos are becoming extremely important in today's virtual world, as we're experiencing today in this format. But we've got to be able to adapt our stories. The nice thing about this is, and I know our marketing department will love this, is this is an opportunity to tell the same story many ways, right? Write it once, tell it a million times. That saves a lot of time and energy and effort. You don't always have to create a new story. If you just tell it in a different format, it feels new, it creates a different energy, and it reaches more people. I know someone told me once it takes someone 7 times to hear something before they actually act on it. And I think that's extremely important to remember. It's not enough to just say something once. We've got to continually say it over and over in a lot of different formats for it to be impactful.
Yeah, and take advantage of Facebook, Instagram for little clips, for things that the church is doing. Get things up on that, tie in things. I'm working on this. If I used a prayer by Henry Nouwen in my sermon, then put it up on Facebook. I used it then again in a weekly address that is going out. But just tell the story and take advantage. I mean, one of the things that COVID has taught us is Zoom. I mean, I took advantage of Steve Keizer and had him Zoom into our financial meeting and share about the foundation. We have missionaries overseas that we can connect with, and those of you who have the technology, and have them come in right in a worship service. And that's where our dollars are going to help God's world. So get creative in that.
Yeah, creativity is extremely important. Again, I hope this list just helps you remember all the different ways that it can be done. So, it's not, we can't just fall back on, well, we don't have the technology. Well, there are other ways to do it, right? There are ways to tell the story, and we just encourage you to think about all the different ways to tell the story and to do that often and frequently, again, more than just in October, November, or April or May, or whenever your stewardship time is. Do it year round and tell that story. It certainly will make that time in October, November, or April, May, or whenever your stewardship campaign is more meaningful and more relevant if you've already told those stories year round. People will already be familiar with what's going on, and I think that's an extremely important part of it. Keys to success: be prayerful, celebrate your church, communicate, which we talked about. Again, funding ministry, not raising funds, be inviting, not threatening. Challenging your church or your congregation is important. It's good. We spend a lot of time as MROs out in the field with churches talking about vision. Maggie brings a wonderful skill set to our organization, that she's done that in her prior life, and she's worked with a lot of churches to talk about vision and how can we be visionary. People want to look forward. They don't necessarily want to look back, although it's important to connect those, but they want to be visionary. They want to know the difference they're going to make. They want to know that they're getting behind something that's exciting, that's going to make a difference tomorrow, in a month, in a year. And that can be challenging. That can be something that can be exciting for folks. So think about that.
I'm
Yeah,
one big on quarterly statements. I went to a church once that stopped sending out quarterly statements of what people had given because it was too expensive. And I was like, if you don't have the time to do quarterly statements, at least do a statement in June and take that as saying an opportunity to say thank you for supporting this church, for supporting us, the staff, and then list what difference you're making in God's world in those statements.
we talked a little earlier about, donors and their motivation. I think it's also important to know donor situation and what they're having to think about when they make decisions about supporting things and whether or not they're going to give to the stewardship campaign or what it is. And we like to talk about three different pockets of money. The income pocket, which is their annual resources that come in, whether it's from their job or annual income from businesses or those kinds of things. And that's really the pocket they use to make their decisions on a monthly basis, to pay their bills, to commit to the stewardship campaign, discretionary income, that kind of stuff really comes from that pocket. Capital pocket are things that we save for, project, college, insurances, those kinds of things come from capital pocket. And we need to know that changes. Sometimes our needs for those money change over time, and those resources can be used to support things and activities that we want to think about. So we need to consider that in our messaging. And then the last one, the estate pocket, is everything that we've accumulated and things we're going to use, in the future. It's, it's our estate. That's why it's the estate pocket. And that's really a different approach. But to know each one of those and how they interrelate and how donors think about and make decisions from each one of those pockets are important when we're asking them to make a financial commitment to something. And we need to make sure that our stewardship campaign addresses all three of those different areas, because a donor will use all three of those areas to make their decisions. And sometimes a planned gift, an estate gift, can be structured in such a way that it can impact in a positive manner their income pocket, and how they have income and how they use that and how they increase that through tax benefits and those kinds of things. So it's important to have that component in your stewardship campaign and to understand some of that, not to be an expert, but just to know where you can get those resources, right? Where you can find folks that can help with estate planning, where you can provide resources that they can use to do that, and how they can make their estate a Christian legacy of faith in the same manner that they live their life. And I think that's extremely important. We also want to make it easy for folks, right? We have to understand how they give, cash, check, online, credit cards, bank drafts, securities. All of those techniques for making a gift need to be prevalent within our congregations. If we're truly going to be generous, if we're truly going to understand our donors, if we're going to be donor-centered, we have to have all those options available because they'll use them. And as we're learning in this pandemic, in this virtual world, online giving has become extremely important, more so now than ever, in providing those resources for folks. Gail, you were going to add something.
Yeah, the last 3 churches I was at bulked that online giving because you do pay a small fee for that. And I like to tell this story. This summer, I bought a condo in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I'll eventually retire to. My son is renting it from me. And he said, how am I going to get you your paycheck? And I said, just write me a check. And he said, Mom, I haven't had checks in 10 years. I was like, well, how do you pay your account? Pay bill, transfer from my bank account, Venmo. And the point is, he's 37 years old. He hasn't had a checkbook since he was 27 years old. He's also someone who gives very generous to the churches that he's been involved in. And, you know, my other kids say, we wouldn't even look at a church unless they had the ability to give online. And that's something to share with your older congregants. If we're going to be relatable to up and coming generations, we have to make it easy for them. But it also, we have to show that we're in this 21st century.
Exactly. I skipped a few slides because I'm looking at the time and noticing that we do want to save some time for questions and answers. But there's a few that I just wanted to highlight. This one in particular, because I think it's important to know, you know, the role that the pastor plays in this, because we think it's a significant role. We talk a lot about the pastor as the CEO and what that means and how you are the main leader of some of these activities. But as Gail said earlier, you know, she's found a lot of success in talking about their own stewardship. Pastors need to be comfortable with that as examples, not as a look at me, not as a this is what I do, you know, but more of a this is what I, you know, this is my faith journey too. And I'm here with you in doing this, and this is how I do it, and this is how I perceive it, and this is my you know, experience with stewardship. I think that goes a long way in helping relate to others about that and the messaging that comes from the pastor to the members about stewardship. Preach about it, you know, often and regularly. We talked about that. Be a storyteller, and then be the cheerleader, the one that, you know, really says thank you a lot and encourages others to say thank you. Gail, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I'm going to say in the resources and books you're going to read, there's going to be a strong emphasis on a pastor knowing what congregants give. And many of you will get pushback on that. I always like to say, if I know about someone's heart attack, at times their STDs or affairs they've had, I can certainly keep quiet or know what people are giving. But it gives me an indication of what is the giving potential? What are people giving? And I think it's fair to say in some churches where you're looking at finances, it's fair to say I need to be able to do a projection of where we're at with tithers, what we're giving. But then again, what Steve said, pick up their stories, share them. I let people know I don't give 10% on my gross income. I give 10% on my salary. I don't know, I save to give others from the housing portion, but just become comfortable in talking about money, but not so much even money, but sharing stories and the difference that the church is making.
And the session's role can, you know, the session can play an important part in that as well. You know, they can share their stories, they can give testimonials, you know, support the process, be pledgers, and be leaders in that as well. It doesn't all have to fall at the feet of the pastor. And the session as the leaders of the church as well can play an extremely important role in that process.
And if there's a pushback of the pastor knowing, I don't think this is something you die over, right? You know, it's going to come gradual. Read a few books together. Cliff, the books can tell it often better than what we can tell the congregation.
Right. The next part or the ending to this is really the resources that are available to you. You know, the foundation has quite a few resources. I know there are other resources out there as well that you can find, but we have an online giving program. If you haven't already incorporated online giving in your church, it's a definite must. Again, the pandemic has proven that to be true. You can easily find this at our website, but it's a really good way to incorporate online giving into your website, your social media platforms, and to give members an option for going online and making their gifts. So we encourage you to look at that. We also encourage you to think about planned giving as part of your stewardship program. It's not just for the wealthy, as some people think. Planned giving is for everybody. Again, we have been blessed with many, many resources over our life, and we need to plan for those when we are no longer in need of them. And you can have a strong planned giving program as part of your stewardship program that can encourage folks to do that. One of the things that came up on a previous slide was the Legacy Society, and this is really where that fits. We have a format for a Legacy Society that uses the planned giving aspect of that. So your Legacy Society is built around those who have left the church in their estate plans, whether through a bequest in a will, whether that's through a trust or some sort, and your Legacy Society really becomes a way to encourage folks to leave a planned gift, and it works really well. There's information on our website about legacy programs. There's information on our website about planned giving programs, but I encourage you, as Gail has done in the past with me, to reach out to your ministry relation officer like Maggie, who is our ministry relations officer in the Southwest. You can find your ministry relations officer on our website. I would encourage you to reach out to them. They'll help you with this aspect of it. It's kind of the core business of the foundation is planned giving. We've been doing legacy education and managing endowments for 220 plus years for the denomination. And it's really something that if you don't have in your repertoire, it's something we really encourage you to think about.
Can I
The
say
other resources, yeah, go ahead, Gail, real
about
quick.
the Legacy Society is I think that oftentimes churches and people within churches think about, well, I'm not that wealthy, I can't be part of it, or I don't have thousands of dollars to give. And the last church I was at, in 1 year, they lost 44 members. Just think if each of those 44 people had given $100 to $1,000 to the church, where that would have been. And I think that's where we come in too, is helping to say, it's just not for the people that we look at as those very prosperous people, but it becomes stewardship, becomes a discipline, and you're showing your kids and your will that, the kids may be getting the bulk of it, but we listed the church as something important. You're helping people pass on the faith.
Very much so. And then this slide just gives some websites of some resources. Again, we've mentioned ours, www.presbyterianfoundation.org. We have a stewardship navigator, which is an online resource to help you organize your stewardship campaigns. New Covenant Funds is a family of mutual funds, as Gail mentioned earlier in our session about social responsible investing, having our money reflect our faith as Presbyterians. That can be done through our mutual fund platform. We have a trust company that can help with some planned gifts, trust development, other investments. And then stewardship-resources.org is a wonderful way to find some stewardship specific resources that you may need to incorporate into your campaigns. And then we also wanted to provide you some books. We mentioned Cliff's books, Cliff's book. He also has written some others, but we're also big proponents of anything that Bill Enright does from the Lilly School of Philanthropy at IU, Indiana University. Bill has done some wonderful work on giving and trends and those kinds of things. The Bolsinger book and the Gray book are two wonderful books for helping you create some vision. How do you lead a faith organization as a session? And we encourage those as well as things to look. I know Gail did the Sailboat Church in one of her churches in Michigan as a session retreat, and it turned out really well for her. But we encourage those types of things. Here's some others as well that are in the same vein and same line. And again, your ministry relations officer is familiar with all of these and can help you figure out which one might be best for what you need in your church and your situation. And I think that's it. Maggie, we did get everything in
No,
just under an hour. We pressed that. But we did want to end it with this that says, don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant.
and I'm
Again,
going
this is
to ask,
about planting seeds. This is about laying that groundwork for the future and being okay with the process and focusing on that as opposed to focusing on the end result, and know that the end result will come not by our means, but by God's ensuing that on people's hearts and motivating them to be involved in his kingdom and making a difference. Okay, Gail, I'll let you finish.
well, I'm just going to say, I can't encourage you enough as volunteers, pastors, people interested in stewardship. Take a day or half a day as a work day and explore the resources that the Presbyterian Foundation gives. Their Stewardship Navigator, you can keep track of all sorts of notes. There's all sorts of sermons on there. There's a plethora of resources. I guess what, and all the resources Steve has given and what I've learned is you don't have to invent this wheel by yourself. The foundation's done it for you and it's free. I mean, I just can't say that enough.
Great, thanks. All right, Maggie, we are ready for questions if we have some time still left. I think we do.
We do.
Thank you.
And, let's all grab a reaction and just applause or thumbs up or something for Gail and Steve. I really appreciate what you shared. Thank you very much for that. And I hope that everybody got something from that you can take with you. We do have quite a few questions, so we'll try to get through some of these. If we don't get to your question specifically, then I would encourage you, and I put in the chat a link to where to find your ministry relations officer. There's a whole bunch of us across the country, and if you have a specific question we're not able to get to today, we are the folks who will be able to help you answer those questions or provide consultative resources around solving that problem or just being a thought partner. I do a lot of that kind of work.
Maggie, if I may, real quick, I would offer too, if you just wanted to give me the questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them in writing, and we could include them with the slides or whatever too, if that's helpful. Because I do want people to get their questions answered.
Absolutely. And so we will try to get through most of these. A lot of the questions were very tactical, and I think that some of those were answered in the resources that were provided. And I'll just say again, for anyone who joined a little late, these recordings of all the sessions today will be made available to you. And we will also include the slides that all of our presenters are using today. So when you get that link, you'll have access to all of those things. It will probably be a few days before we're able to get that out, but look for an email that has that link and access to those. Let me jump in first. And I think that Gail and Steve, you might both answer this question a little bit differently. But there were a few questions specifically about tithing and talking about giving from the perspective of a pastor, and more specifically from a pastor who's younger and might still have student debt, or is trying to balance living in a world where there's debt and perhaps lower salary because they're younger in their ministry, and trying to buy a house and that kind of thing. And so the question was really, how do you deal with those expectations for giving and for being an example of giving, when in a lot of ways you're not really in a place where that's comfortable yet?
Steve, can I go on that?
Of course, Gail, please.
Well, a wonderful person who just actually passed away this past year, Charlie Pye. When people were graduating from college or from seminary, or even from any other college, Charlie always used to say to look at your student debt as part of your tithe. Other people might not agree with that, but I think we have to acknowledge that I'm 64 years old. There were many years I couldn't tithe. I gave proportionately. And so, I always decided that with a family, with my kids, how much are we giving? This is what I make, this is what I do, this is what I give. So I think that that's a really realistic thing, is that you can say your place in life, but you also can say, I give proportionately. You don't even have to share always what you give. I'm at a point in my life where I can do that. And I think we do. And I want everyone listening to recognize that there's different stages. Is that helpful, Steve?
I think it is, Gail, and I think you're spot on. I think what I hear you saying is it's more of a journey and a destination than it is an immediacy. We should be tithing right now. The statistics that's been shared with me over the years about giving and tithing and percentage and all of that is, the PCUSA on average, their member gives about 1.7% of their net income to the church. That's a far cry, right, from the 10% figure that we typically use as a tithe. So we're really talking about, a journey, a goal, something to reach for. And again, that's why we talk about it coming, first fruits, as opposed to, the 10%, the amount and all that, is getting in that discipline of giving something. So like you said, Gail, proportionally to what your situation is in life right now, and doing that first and getting into that discipline. And then if you can increase it over time as your situations change, again, my life has changed dramatically, as most of the folks that know me and as you know me know. I'm an empty nester now, and my life is totally different than it was when I was trying to put kids through college, or trying to get them through high school, or trying to just get them off on their own. And now that they're off on their own, my life is in a totally different place that I never would have thought of, even 4 years ago, more or less 10, 15 years ago, when I was right out of college. So I think you're right. I think the proportionate, I think the letting your situation dictate, and just getting into a discipline of giving something is more important than doing that. The other aspect that I understand is, I like what you said about maybe including your student loan as, part of your tithe, because Presbyterians give to, 6 or 7 different things, their church being one of those. So if you incorporate all of that as your tithe, as well, it's a different way of looking at it, instead of just what I give to the church as my tithe. So there are a lot of ways to look at it. I think it's important to figure out which aspect fits best for your situation as a giver, and also as a congregation, and preach that, and not realize that this is not a one size fits all kind of thing. Hopefully that helps Maggie answer that question.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, and it's certainly challenging, because there were also a number of questions that came in that are speaking to, I think, what you, Steve and Gail, touched on a little bit, which is how do we, what I heard in the questions was, how do we value the spirituality of giving when we're giving more holistically, or how do we look at that as being valuable if we're not just giving to the church, but we're giving to all these other things that are representative of our values. Can we feel good about that if we're not tithing to the church?
Right.
And I am at a point in my life where I can be very open with that. And I realize that other people are different ways of that. So I do tithe on my salary. I don't tithe on my housing. But I don't give all of that to the church. I'm open with that. I think, to be honest, I give $4,000 a year to the church, but then I have other places that I give and what I give back to. And I think there's that comfort level, and I always preface it of where I am in life. Now, having said I give that much, I'm still within the top donors of most churches. What does that say on a pastor's salary compared to many other people? But it also brings some reality, is as God's church changes, as Christ's church changes, we can't always assume that people who come to the PCUSA are of a financial means to be giving, things have to be taught. And we aren't always going, our churches should not be comprised of just middle-class people.
Gail, let me pursue a piece that you mentioned that I think that would be interesting to people based on the questions we saw. And Steve, you can jump in with this as well.
Sure.
But when we talk about the totality of, or the holistic nature of our generosity, and it not just living within the walls of the church, is there a place for the church to invite people to be sharing about that as we're asking them to share about their giving? Do we want to invite them into talking about all the things that they value and all of the ways in which they are acting as stewards and acting generously in their lives?
I would say absolutely. And we help people with that. The last church I was at, someone's daughter had a congenital heart disease, and the church decided to do open up their space for a fundraiser for that. I think what Steve is saying, generosity begets generosity. It's the giving spirit. And as Presbyterians too, I think we say we have a lot of interests outside of just the church. I think we need to be honest with that. Steve?
Yeah, I totally agree, Gail. And Maggie, I think you're right. I think this is an extremely important, concept to try to get as we change. The growing amount of competition for our, members' time, talent, and treasure is undeniable, right? I mean, not nonprofits have grown over the last, 15 years, 100%, right? The amount of competition for, people to spend their time and their talent and their treasure is beyond the church. That day when, everything gave through the church because the church was the only one, helping the poor or feeding the poor or, clothing the people that needed to be clothed. Those kinds of things no longer exist. So if we can embrace that, if we can understand that, if we can, praise that as well as what's going on in the church, I think to Gail's point, we're going to be better off. I have a wonderful opportunity to travel the world, or travel the world, sorry, got a little bit global there, travel the country with you all, Maggie, as you know, and get to hear what a lot of churches are doing. And I had an experience about 3 years ago sitting down with a pastor over lunch, and he was talking about this issue. And they finally got to the point where they were tracking everything that everybody was giving to, not only in the church, but outside, and started using that as their impact story and the difference they were having in the community beyond their walls and the success that they were having from that. To Gail's point, generosity begets generosity. They're giving to all of that increase, the church, the other organizations, because they started celebrating it, telling those stories. So I think you're right, Maggie. I think it is important to tell that story. I think it's important to understand that, it's okay to give beyond the walls of the church and to celebrate that. And how do we engage in that? And how do we become partners with those organizations so we can celebrate that together is an extremely important part moving forward. And I think it fits the landscape, the changing landscape of philanthropy out there better than just trying to fit that into our old paradigm of it's got to come to the church and that's all we're talking about. Go ahead, Gail.
And the church is part of the world. So one of the things I did at my last installed position is we gave to organizations within the community. We'll turn a sermon or a moment into mission of interviewing the director of that organization. I'm serving a church right now that gives 20% of their budget to mission. We'll bring in some of those local missions to share what's going on. At the church I was at in Michigan, we supported a health clinic. So she came in and I interviewed her in a sermon, the director, and then encouraged the whole congregation to sign up to help with their big fundraisers, to volunteer. And, stewardship became collecting bags to give people who visited the clinic of toothpaste, of deodorant, of various things is, and involving the community. So one of my sermons actually, Marshall, Michigan connected with Albion schools with their schools. And I did a sermon interviewing the superintendent of the schools. And I consider that stewardship because we're part alive in God's world. It's just, can't emphasize enough, it's just not money.
Yeah, and Maggie, I don't know if this example is exactly on spot with the question or where we're going, but I think it's relevant enough to share. And I think it's an extremely important point to make. And it actually was one of Gail's churches that we were working with. And Gail, you can correct me if I get the details wrong. I hope I get the gist of the story correct. But, you know, they were doing Sunday or Wednesday meals in the church. And it got to be extremely time consuming to do, you know, meals and stuff in the church. And Gail encouraged them to start looking into the community to places that were doing that so they didn't have to do it, right? So they went out as members and participated in other meals during the week that other organizations were doing. And over time, you know, they would start talking to people about the work of the church because people would ask, well, why are you here? You know, and they'd say, well, we're from, you know, First Pres, and we come and we're participating and we think what you're doing is great. And oh, by the way, we're doing these things at First Pres as well. And they got to share their stories and they got to talk about it. And I know Gail received a check from a very benevolent person in the community who witnessed that and said, I love what you're doing. I'm probably not going to be a member, but I need what you're still doing, right, to exist. Here's some money to support that. And it was all because they went out and partnered with another organization. Now, again, that's different than what you're asking about money going out. This is money coming in, but it does emphasize the impact that you can have by partnering with other groups. You don't always have to do it yourself within the confines of the church, I guess.
Right. And I think that that's actually really important because we were talking about money, but we're also talking about stewardship and time, talent, treasure. Right. So if we're taking our stewardship out into the world in that capacity, then that's also, you know, a form of how we're acting as stewards within and from the values of the church. And we have just a few minutes left, but I want to try and get a couple more questions in. I think that leads us well into a question that came up. It's a little bit more tactical, but how do you help people identify their spiritual gifts and then start to track that? So, you know, if we do have a lot of people going out into the community, doing the work out there, how do we track that as a part of the stewardship of the church? And how do we also help people identify the gifts that they have that they can grow in as they're acting as stewards?
Yeah, so as I told you, my dad was a Presbyterian pastor. He's now retired, but in one of his calls, it was a new church development back in the day. And even to this day, I think last week, my dad shared this story with me again. But he talked about, you know, during that process, how important it was and how he continued this even once the church was, you know, established, was going out and meeting with people, right? Setting up appointments and going talking to them, I think is the first step in that. He would always set time aside every week to make sure that he was calling people and going to their houses and sitting down with them and talking with them, Maggie, about their stories. What were they doing? Again, not necessarily within the church, but outside, right? And hearing what was going on with their family, their time, and all that stuff. And then he would go back and write vigorous notes and make sure he documented, okay, this is what they're doing. You know, Maggie is, you know, volunteering at, you know, the Red Cross and giving blood, right? That's obviously important to you if you're doing that. And he would, you know, keep notes on that and encourage it. And then he would make sure that he would, you know, mention that and talk to them and all of that. So I think just having those open communications, setting time aside where you're communicating with people one-on-one, you know, to understand who they are, right? Being donor-centered, understanding them as individuals, will help you reveal where their heart is, right? And where their passions are. And then second, I think it's having a lot of opportunities for people to participate. Gail said this earlier, it's not just saying, since someone sings really well, the only thing I'm going to ask them to do is sing a solo because that's their talent. It's maybe asking them to say, I know you sing, but hey, maybe you want to come over here on a Tuesday and maybe you want to plant shrubs, because we're doing urban renewal and we're, planting trees in a park somewhere downtown, and find out that, well, they sing, but they also love to garden, right? And how can we use those talents? Or maybe they tried and they don't like it, but encouraging folks to try a lot of different things will help them find where their passion is, where their desires. Because I think you're right. A lot of times people get comfortable with what they're good at. And to encourage them to try to go out of their comfort zone and do some things, it may not work, but it may reveal that, wow, I can sing, but I also have a talent for, gardening or whatever it is. I use those examples because those are the ones that came to head. But I think those two things partnered together can kind of help you understand what they do and maybe reveal what they haven't revealed yet or experienced yet. Gail, go ahead, add to that.
Well, I think if we hold to the belief that we are all created in God's image, then we as spiritual leaders are, I think, called to reflect back to people where we see God working in their lives and their image. And wow, you do that really well. And then, finding out, why are you interested in this? And sometimes it's the hobbies. Why are you interested in that? And using their talents and gifts like that. And, if you have a runner in the church, how would you like to use this gift? My son, when he was in middle school, a man loved to run, and he took time to get all sponsor kids in their first 5K. How are they doing? What are they doing? And I love this story of one of my longtime spiritual mentor grew up at First Pres in Ann Arbor, and she tells the story that Robert McNamara was her middle school Sunday school teacher. And McNamara had said, I don't want to be on session. I'm too busy. I've been too busy in that type of leadership. And the pastor said, well, how would you like to serve? And he said, I'd like to teach 7th or 8th grade Sunday school. And so, we just ask, what would you like to do? What excites you? And that's stewardship. And that, part of my view of stewardship is helping people recognize where God is shining through in their lives and reflecting it back on them.
Well said.
Yeah. Gail, thank you so much for that. And Steve, thank you so much for your comments as well. I'm going to do a little bit more logistics, thank the two of you, and then close us for this session. But what I wanted to say in response to what I just heard from both of you is the necessity of showing up and getting to know someone, and then asking them how they want to serve, asking them how they want to participate, inviting them in to that relationship with you, rather than waiting for someone to say or to raise their hand. Someone put in the chat early on, I heard that the biggest reason people don't give is because nobody asks. And I think that can be true, across that whole spectrum of how we engage as stewards. You don't give your time, your talent, or your treasure if nobody ever invites you to be a part of engaging in that aspect of your life and developing that spiritually.
Amen.
So thank you both for this wonderful, wonderful learning and all the wisdom that you shared with us today. Again, I would